Captain Lieutenant Heinrich Muller brought you 456 to periscope depth at 417 hours, following protocol that had kept him alive through 23 combat patrols. The pre-dawn darkness offered protection, the time when Allied aircraft couldn't see his submarine preparing to surface. He scanned the horizon through periscope, rotating slowly through a full circle. Empty ocean in every direction. No ships, no aircraft. Perfect conditions for surfacing to recharge batteries and refresh the air inside the submarine that had become poisonous after 18 hours submerged. Surface, Muller ordered. The diving planes tilted, and 456 rose from the depths like a steel whale breaching for air. Water cascaded off the conning tower as it broke through the waves. Muller climbed topside immediately, his lookouts following close behind. They took their positions, binocular scanning sea and sky with practiced efficiency. Still nothing. The Atlantic stretched empty and dark around them. The diesel engines coughed life, their rumble a welcome sound after hours of battery-powered silence. Below deck, the electric motors switched to charging mode, storing power for the next dive. Fresh air poured through open hatches, replacing the toxic mixture of diesel fumes, unwashed bodies, and chemical toilet that defines submarine life. The crew breathed deeply, grateful for this brief respite on the surface. 12 minutes passed. 12 minutes of routine battery charging on an empty ocean. Then the lookout's voice shattered the calm with words that turned Muller's blood to ice. Aircraft, bearing 270. Range 2 kilometers and closing fast. Muller's binoculars snapped to the indicated bearing. There was a British Sunderland flying boat, appearing from nowhere like an avenging ghost. But that was impossible. The Sunderland had approached from upwind, meaning its engine noise had been carried away from the submarine. No visual sighting could have been made in this darkness. The aircraft had found them through some other means, and it was already too close for a successful dive. All hands below. Dive, 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 Muller shouted. But he knew the mathematics of death were already calculated. The Sunderland was 60 seconds away. 456 needed 90 seconds to submerge deep enough to survive a depth charge attack. The numbers didn't work. The first depth charge hit the water 20 meters from U-450 SXS conning tower, just as the submarine's deck went under. The explosion lifted the stern, twisting the pressure hull with forces it was never designed to withstand. Muller, still on the conning tower ladder, was thrown against steel plating. Below him, he heard screaming and the terrible sound of metal tearing. The second depth charge detonated closer, and U-450 SXS lights went out as electrical systems failed. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing the submarine's interior in red. Water was pouring through ruptured seals in 3 locations. The damage control team scrambled to contain the flooding, but Muller could feel the submarine settling stern first, sinking beyond controlled depth. They were going down, and the pressure would eventually crush them like an aluminum cannon of vice. Below, all ballast tanks. Emergency surface, Muller ordered, abandoning any hope of escape through diving. Their only chance now was to surface and surrender before the submarine imploded. Compressed air roared to the ballast tanks, forcing water out, giving U-456 just enough buoyancy to claw its way back toward the surface. They broke through the waves with U-456 listing heavily to port, water still pouring in through damaged seals, the stern sitting dangerously low. The Sunderland circled overhead, its crew watching to ensure the submarine wouldn't dive again. More British aircraft appeared on the horizon, drawn to the location by radio calls from the Sunderland. Within 30 minutes, a Royal Navy destroyer was racing toward them at flank speed. Muller ordered the crew topside. 42 men assembled on the tilting deck, hands raised in surrender, watching their submarine die beneath them. U-456 was sinking slowly, the flooding now beyond control. The destroyer arrived just in time, pulling the German crew from the water as their submarine made its final dive into the Atlantic depths. Aboard the destroyer HMS Wanderer, Muller sat wrapped in a blanket, drinking hot tea provided by his captors, trying to understand what had happened. "How did you find us?" he asked the British officer guarding him, speaking in careful English. We were on the surface less than 15 minutes. No one could have seen us in that darkness. The British officer smiled but said nothing. The answer to that question was classified at the highest level, one of the most closely guarded secrets of the war. But Muller would learn the truth soon enough, along with every other German U-boat commander who survived encounters with the Royal Navy's new technology. In Berlin, Grand Admiral Karl Donitz was receiving reports that troubled him deeply. U-boat losses in the Atlantic had increased dramatically over the past 3 months. Submarines that had survived dozens of patrols were being caught on the surface and destroyed before they could dive to safety. The pattern was undeniable. Allied forces were finding U-boats with impossible speed and accuracy. Donitz called a meeting of his senior staff at U-boat headquarters in Paris. Maps covered the walls, showing locations where submarines had been attacked. Red pins marked each loss, and the pattern was clear. U-boats were most vulnerable when surfacing to recharge batteries, and that's precisely when the Allies were finding them. "Gentlemen," Donitz said, his voice heavy with concern, "we are losing the Battle of the Atlantic. Our submarines are being hunted with a precision we cannot explain. I need answers." The intelligence officers present offered various theories. Perhaps the Allies had broken German naval codes. Perhaps French resistance members were reporting U-boat departure times from Biscay ports. Perhaps Allied aircraft were simply flying more patrols. But none of these explanations satisfied Donitz. Code changes had not reduced losses. Tighter security at ports had made no difference. The Allies were finding U-boats in the middle of the empty Atlantic, far from any possible observation post. "What about radar?" suggested one young officer. "British surface vessels carry radar. Perhaps their aircraft do as well." Donitz shook his head dismissively. "We considered radar extensively. Our technical experts assure us that airborne radar capable of detecting a submarine is impossible with current technology. The wavelength required would need antennas far too large for any aircraft to carry. British radar operates on meter-length waves. We know this from captured equipment. Such radar cannot detect small targets like submarine conning towers against ocean surface clutter." The technical officer present, Corvette Captain Werner Hartmann, nodded in agreement. "Our METOX radar detectors would warn us if Allied aircraft were using radar. The METOX picks up radar emissions from long distances, giving U-boats time to dive before the aircraft arrives. Yet we're receiving reports of aircraft appearing without any METOX warning. This suggests the attacks are not radar-based. What the Germans didn't know, what they couldn't know because their understanding of physics was incomplete, was that the British had developed centimetric radar operating on wavelengths of 10 centimeters rather than meters. This shorter wavelength allowed for smaller antennas that could fit on aircraft, and more importantly, it provided resolution sharp enough to detect a submarine conning tower against ocean waves. The METOX detectors carried by U-boats were designed to pick up meter-length radar waves. They were completely blind to centimetric radar. Across the Atlantic, at the Telecommunications Research Establishment in Malvern, England, British scientists were celebrating their latest success. The cavity magnetron, a device that generated high-power microwave radiation, had made centimetric radar practical for the first time. Dr. Robert Henderson, one of the lead scientists on the project, was reviewing operational reports from RAF Coastal Command. 23 U-boat detections this month using the new ASV Mark III radar. Henderson told his colleague Dr. Sarah Mitchell, his voice filled with satisfaction. The Germans still don't understand what's hitting them. Their intelligence reports show they're blaming everything except the actual cause. Mitchell studied the reports carefully. How long until they figure it out? Surely they'll capture one of our aircraft eventually and find the radar equipment. Henderson smiled. They've already captured several downed aircraft. But here's the beautiful part. They don't believe what they're seeing. German physicists have calculated that centimetric radar is theoretically possible, but practically impossible to build with current technology. They think we're at least 5 years away from developing it. So when they find our radar sets, they assume it's some kind of experimental equipment, not standard operational technology. This belief, this fatal assumption that British technology was inferior to German technology, would cost the Kriegsmarine dearly. German scientists had indeed explored centimetric radar, but had concluded that the engineering challenges were insurmountable with available resources. They had focused instead on improving their existing meter-wave radar systems. The British, driven by desperation in the early years of the war, had pushed through those engineering challenges and created a weapon the Germans didn't think existed. In May 1943, this technological blindness reached its crisis point. U-boat losses for the month reached unsustainable levels. 41 submarines destroyed, most of them caught on the surface by aircraft that seemed to appear from thin air. Dönitz made the painful decision to withdraw U-boats from the North Atlantic convoy routes until the mystery could be solved. For the first time since 1940, the U-boats were retreating. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. HMS Biter, a British escort carrier, engaged U-752 in the Bay of Biscay. The submarine, commanded by Captain Lieutenant Karl Ernst Schroeder, fought back desperately with anti-aircraft guns rather than diving. The battle lasted 18 minutes before U-752 was finally sunk, but not before scoring hits on 2 British aircraft. One of those aircraft, badly damaged, made an emergency landing at a German-held airfield in France before the crew realized their navigation error. The captured aircraft was a Swordfish torpedo bomber, and mounted beneath its fuselage was a strange box-like structure that German intelligence officers initially assumed was a new type of bomb rack. The equipment was sent to the Kriegsmarine Technical Evaluation Center in Kiel, where engineers began the careful process of disassembly and analysis. Hartmann was called to Kiel the moment the equipment's true nature was identified. He stood in the laboratory, staring at the radar set with growing horror. "This is impossible," he kept repeating, his hands trembling as he examined the cavity magnetron. "The frequency is... This is operating at 3,000 megahertz. That's 10-centimeter wavelength. Our physicists said this was impossible to achieve." The lead engineer, Dr. Klaus Reinhardt, shook his head slowly. "Not impossible, just very difficult. The British have solved problems we believed were unsolvable. Look at this magnetron design. It's crude, almost primitive in construction, but it works. They've sacrificed elegance for functionality, built something that can be mass-produced rather than perfect." Hartmann picked up the magnetron, turning it over in his hands. This small device, barely larger than a coffee cup, was responsible for the destruction of dozens of U-boats. How many of these do the British have? Is this experimental or operational? Based on the construction quality and the mounting hardware, I'd estimate this is production equipment, not a prototype. The British have probably installed these on hundreds of aircraft. Reinhardt pulled out technical drawings his team had created. The antenna is small enough to fit in that streamlined housing under the aircraft. The resolution at this wavelength is extraordinary. They can detect a submarine conning tower from 15 kilometers away, even in rough seas. Hartmann felt sick. Our METOX detectors? Useless. METOX operates on completely different frequencies. It cannot detect centimetric radar at all. Every U-boat in our fleet is blind to this technology. Reinhardt paused, choosing his words carefully. "Sir, we need to inform Admiral Dönitz immediately. Our entire operational doctrine is based on the assumption that U-boats receive radar warning before aircraft arrive. That assumption is false. We've been sending our submarines into battle blind." The report reached Dönitz within hours. He read it 3 times, each reading making him angrier. Why didn't our scientists predict this? Why didn't our intelligence service discover this months ago? How many men have died because we underestimated British technological capability? His chief of staff had no good answers. "Sir, our scientists believed the British were following the same research path we were. They calculated that centimetric radar required technical breakthroughs that would take years to achieve. They were wrong." Dönitz slammed his fist on the desk. "Wrong. While they were calculating what was theoretically impossible, the British were building it and deploying it. We've lost the Battle of the Atlantic because our scientists couldn't imagine that the British might be more innovative than we are." The captured radar set was photographed, documented, and analyzed in minute detail. German scientists confirmed what they didn't want to believe. The British had leapfrogged German radar technology by at least 3 years. The cavity magnetron design was revolutionary. and Germany had nothing comparable in development. Even if they started an immediate crash program, it would take 18 months to replicate British capabilities. Emergency orders went out to all U-boats. New procedures were implemented. Submarines were forbidden from surfacing during daylight hours. Battery charging had to be done at night, in the briefest possible time, with maximum vigilance. New radar detectors capable of picking up centimetric wavelengths were rushed into development, but production wouldn't begin for months. The impact of the captured radar set rippled through German naval operations with devastating clarity. In June 1943, Dönitz convened another meeting at U-boat headquarters, but this time the mood was somber rather than confused. Now, they understood why they were losing. The question was what to do about it. Gentlemen, we face a technological disadvantage that cannot be overcome quickly. Dönitz began, his voice heavy with the weight of command decisions that would determine the fate of thousands of submariners. The British can see our U-boats when we cannot see their aircraft. This fundamentally changes the nature of submarine warfare. Hartmann presented the technical analysis. Charts and diagrams covered the conference table, showing the detection ranges and capabilities of British centimetric radar. At 10-centimeter wavelength, their radar can detect a surface U-boat from approximately 15 kilometers in good conditions, slightly less in rough seas. The conning tower presents a clear radar return that stands out from ocean surface clutter. By the time a lookout spots the aircraft visually, it's already within 2 kilometers. Far too close for a successful dive. One of the older U-boat commanders, Fregatten Captain Otto Kretschmer, recently returned from British captivity in a prisoner exchange, raised a question that had been troubling everyone. Can we detect their radar emissions? Build a new warning receiver? We're working on it, Hartmann replied. But there are technical challenges. The new radar detectors need components we're only now learning to manufacture. The British magnetron operates at frequencies our existing equipment was never designed to detect. We estimate 6 months minimum before we can deploy effective warning receivers to the fleet. 6 months. The number hung in the air like a death sentence. 6 more months of U-boats surfacing blind, unable to detect the aircraft hunting them. 6 more months of losses that the Kriegsmarine could not sustain. Germany simply didn't have enough submarines or trained crews to absorb casualties at the current rate, while waiting for technology to catch up. What about modifying U-boat operations to account for this radar? Asked another commander. If we cannot detect them, can we at least minimize our exposure? Dönitz nodded. That's precisely what we must do. New operational orders are being drafted. U-boats will surface only at night, and only when absolutely necessary. Surface time will be limited to the minimum required for battery charging. Multiple lookouts will maintain constant visual scan of the sky. At the first sign of aircraft, crash dive immediately. Don't wait to confirm if it's hostile. These new procedures would help, but they came with significant costs. Restricting surface time meant batteries couldn't be fully charged, reducing the submarine's underwater endurance and operational range. Constant crash diving meant wear and tear on equipment, exhausted crews, and reduced effectiveness. The U-boats were being forced into a defensive posture, reacting to British advantages rather than pressing their attacks. Meanwhile, British intelligence was monitoring German communications and noticed a sudden change in U-boat behavior. At Bletchley Park, where German naval codes were being broken regularly, analysts observed that U-boat radio traffic now frequently mentioned radar and included detailed instructions about avoiding detection. The conclusion was obvious. The Germans had finally discovered centimetric radar. Commander Edward Travis, who oversaw naval intelligence operations at Bletchley Park, called a meeting with RAF Coastal Command to discuss the implications. The Germans know about the radar now. They've changed their operating procedures accordingly. We should expect U-boats to be harder to find going forward. Air Vice Marshal John Slessor, commander of RAF Coastal Command, wasn't particularly worried. Even if they know about the radar, there's nothing they can do about it in the short term. Their submarines still need to surface to recharge batteries. When they surface, we can find them. The only difference is they'll be more cautious, which means they'll spend less time on the surface, which means they'll be less effective at attacking convoys. The prediction proved accurate. U-boat effectiveness declined sharply after June 1943. Not only were they being caught more frequently when they did surface, but the restrictions on surface time meant they couldn't maintain station in convoy attack positions. A U-boat that could only surface for an hour at night couldn't keep pace with a convoy making 10 knots. The submarines that had once terrorized Atlantic shipping were now spending most of their time hiding and running. By September 1943, German engineers had developed the Naxos radar detector, capable of picking up centimetric radar emissions. The device was rushed into production and distributed to U-boats as quickly as possible. Captain Lieutenant Hans Weber took U-621 on patrol with one of the first Naxos units installed, eager to test whether the new technology would restore the early warning capability that U-boats desperately needed. The Naxos worked, but not well enough. It could detect British radar, but only at about 8 kilometers range, roughly half the distance at which the British radar could detect a submarine. Weber discovered this limitation the hard way when a Sunderland appeared at 5 kilometers range, the Naxos having given him only 3 minutes warning. U-621 managed to crash dive successfully, but the encounter demonstrated that the Germans were still at a significant disadvantage. The Naxos helps, but it's not enough, Weber reported after returning to base. The British can see us before we can detect them seeing us. We're always playing catch-up, always reacting rather than initiating. This is not how submarine warfare is supposed to work. The fundamental problem was that radar technology favored detection over counter-detection. An active radar transmitted powerful signals that could detect targets at long range. A passive radar detector could only listen for those transmissions and had much shorter effective range. The British had established technological superiority, and the Germans couldn't overcome it through defensive technology alone. Donitz faced a reality that the U-boat campaign had effectively failed. The submarines that had nearly strangled Britain through blockade in 1940 and 1941 were now the hunted rather than the hunters. Production of new U-boats continued, but losses exceeded replacements. Experienced crews were being killed faster than new crews could be trained. The mathematical curve was trending toward zero, a point where German submarine forces would cease to be an effective fighting force. In November 1943, another captured piece of British equipment provided more bad news for German naval intelligence. A damaged Royal Navy destroyer, HMS Opportune, had been forced into a neutral port in Spain after a naval engagement. Before Spanish authorities could properly secure the vessel, German agents photographed its radar equipment. The destroyer carried not just air search radar, but also surface search radar operating on the same centimetric wavelengths. Hartmann examined the photographs with growing dismay. They fitted their entire surface fleet with this technology. Every destroyer, every escort, every corvette can detect a surface U-boat from beyond visual range. Our submarines are visible to the enemy in a way we never anticipated. This explained another troubling pattern in the operational reports. U-boats attempting night surface attacks on convoys were being intercepted by escorts that seemed to know exactly where the submarine was, even in total darkness. The escorts weren't guessing or getting lucky. They were tracking U-boats with radar precision. German attempts to develop countermeasures continued, but they were always one step behind. By the time German scientists understood a British technology and developed a response, the British had already deployed the next generation. The technological race had become a rout, with Germany struggling to match capabilities that Britain was already moving beyond. The captured radar sets had revealed the truth too late. If German intelligence had discovered centimetric radar in 1942 instead of 1943, perhaps the outcome would have been different. Perhaps German industry could have mobilized to match British technology. Perhaps U-boat tactics could have been adapted before losses became catastrophic. But by mid-1943, the Battle of the Atlantic was effectively over. The U-boats had lost, not through tactical failure, but through technological blindness. By early 1944, the full scope of German technological miscalculation had become painfully apparent. The Kriegsmarine's Technical Intelligence Division compiled a comprehensive report analyzing why they had failed to anticipate British radar advances. Hartmann, now promoted to Fregatin Captain and heading the radar intelligence section, presented his findings to Dönitz in a meeting that would be remembered for its brutal honesty. "Admiral, we failed because we made 3 critical assumptions, all of them wrong," Hartmann began, laying out documents on the conference table. "First, we assumed British physics research was inferior to German research. Second, we assumed that what our scientists found difficult, British scientists would find equally difficult. Third, we assumed the British would follow conventional development paths, rather than taking radical approaches." Dönitz listened grimly as Hartmann continued. "The cavity magnetron that makes centimetric radar possible was invented in Britain in 1940. We didn't learn of its existence until 1943, a 3-year intelligence failure. During those 3 years, the British moved from prototype to mass production while we were still declaring the technology impossible." The report included intercepted documents from British sources, obtained through neutral countries and resistance networks. These documents revealed that Britain had shared cavity magnetron technology with the United States in 1940, and American industrial capacity had been mobilized to produce thousands of radar sets. The technological advantage wasn't just British. It was Anglo-American, backed by manufacturing resources Germany couldn't hope to match. "How many radar-equipped aircraft are the Allies operating?" Dönitz asked, though he suspected he wouldn't like the answer. "Our best estimate is over 2,000 aircraft with centimetric radar in the Atlantic Theater alone," Hartmann replied. "The Americans are producing radar sets faster than we can produce submarines. Every new escort carrier, every coastal patrol aircraft, every destroyer, all equipped with technology we're only now beginning to understand." The numbers were devastating. Germany had started the war with 57 U-boats. By 1944, they had built over 1,000. But Allied centimetric radar, combined with improved tactics, better weapons, and more escort vessels, had created an environment where U-boats could barely operate. The loss rate had reached 40%, meaning a U-boat crew had less than even odds of surviving their first patrol. Dönitz made a decision that would effectively end the U-boat threat. "We're withdrawing the U-boats from convoy attack operations. The losses are unsustainable, and the strategic benefit no longer justifies the cost. Submarines will be redeployed to defensive operations closer to home waters, where they can be supported by land-based air cover." This decision marked the end of the Battle of the Atlantic as a meaningful contest. Allied convoys would continue crossing the ocean, now with minimal interference. The supplies, troops, and equipment needed for the invasion of Europe would flow freely. The U-boat force that had once threatened to win the war for Germany had been neutralized by technology they hadn't believed possible. In Britain, the success of centimetric radar was celebrated quietly within the scientific and military communities. Dr. Henderson and his colleagues at Malvern knew they had contributed to one of the decisive victories of the war, but the technology remained highly classified. Public credit went to improved tactics and greater numbers of escort vessels, which were certainly factors, but the real revolution had been technological. Henderson reviewed operational statistics with satisfaction. From January to June 1943, before the Germans understood what was happening, we sank or damaged over 100 U-boats using radar-equipped aircraft. After they captured our equipment and changed their tactics, the success rate declined, but it was too late. They'd already lost too many experienced crews and too much time. Dr. Mitchell, who had worked on improving radar signal processing, added her own observation. The Germans made the same mistake many people make. They assumed their enemies thought like they did. German scientists approached problems methodically, focusing on theoretical foundations before attempting practical applications. British scientists, under wartime pressure, were willing to try radical solutions without complete theoretical understanding. We built things that worked even if we didn't fully understand why they worked. This difference in approach had proven decisive. The cavity magnetron was not an elegant solution. It was a brute force answer to the problem of generating high-frequency radio waves. British scientists had made it work through trial and error, accepting designs that were crude but functional. German scientists, had they pursued the same research path, might have spent years perfecting the theory before building a single working prototype. The captured German documents and post-war interrogations revealed just how thoroughly the Kriegsmarine had been caught off guard. U-boat commanders' war diaries from 1942 and early 1943 showed repeated references to impossible aircraft detections, to attacks that came without warning, to a growing sense that something fundamental had changed in the Atlantic battle, but without understanding what. The psychological impact of being hunted by an invisible force had been as damaging as the physical losses. Captain Lieutenant Weber, who survived the war, later wrote in his memoirs about the terror of surfacing after mid-1943. Every time we came up, we knew that somewhere in the darkness, an aircraft might be tracking us on radar. The Naxos would beep its warning, but by then it was often too late. We would crash dive and hear depth charges exploding above us, never having seen the aircraft that attacked. It was like fighting a ghost that could see you, but that you could never see. This psychological warfare dimension was something the British had not anticipated but gladly exploited. Allied intelligence began deliberately spreading rumors among German submariners about the capabilities of British radar, sometimes exaggerating what the technology could do. The uncertainty and fear became weapons as effective as the radar itself. By war's end in May 1945, Germany had lost 783 submarines out of approximately 1,150 built, a 68% loss rate. Of those losses, historians estimate that centimetric radar contributed directly or indirectly to over half. The technology that German scientists had declared impossible had become the primary weapon in defeating the U-boat threat. The story of centimetric radar's development and deployment became a case study in technological warfare, studied at military academies and intelligence schools for decades afterward. It demonstrated several key principles. Never underestimate your adversary's technological capabilities. Never assume your own technological approach is the only viable approach, and intelligence about enemy capabilities is only valuable if you believe it and act on it quickly. The captured radar sets that finally revealed the truth to German intelligence in 1943 sit today in museums in Germany and Britain. The cavity magnetron from a Swordfish aircraft captured in France is displayed at the Deutsches Museum in Munich, a small device that represented a technological revolution. Next to it, a placard explains how this single piece of equipment changed the course of the Battle of the Atlantic and demonstrated the decisive role of technology in modern warfare. For the families of the U-boat crews lost to radar-guided attacks, the knowledge that German intelligence had failed to anticipate the technology was cold comfort. For the Allied sailors and merchant seamen who survived convoy crossings that might have ended differently without centimetric radar, it represented the margin between victory and defeat. For historians, it remains one of the clearest examples of how technological surprise can shift the balance of an entire campaign. The Germans wonder why the Royal Navy found U-boats so fast. By the time they captured the radar sets and understood the answer, it was too late to matter. The Battle of the Atlantic had been decided not by courage or tactics, but by physics and engineering, by scientists in British laboratories who built the impossible while their German counterparts were still calculating why it couldn't be done. Technology doesn't just support warfare. Sometimes it decides the outcome entirely. The story of centimetric radar shows how innovation under pressure can overcome theoretical objections and create weapons that change history. If you found this deep dive into World War II technology fascinating, subscribe to our channel for more stories about the science and engineering that shaped the modern world. History isn't just about battles. It's about the minds that invented the tools to win them.